The old oak tree had stood at the edge of Thomas Walker's farm for as long as anyone in the county could remember. Folks said it was there before his grandfather bought the land back in 1923. Thomas had grown up playing under its massive branches, and now, at 58 years old, he still found himself pausing in its shade during hot summer days working the fields. The Walker family farm stretched across 180 acres of rolling Pennsylvania countryside. It wasn't the biggest operation in the county, but it was respectable. Thomas grew corn and soybeans mostly, with a small apple orchard his wife Lily had insisted on planting when they first married 30 years ago. Their 2 grown children had moved away to the city, leaving just the 2 of them to manage the place. Thomas didn't mind the quiet, though sometimes he wondered what would happen to the farm when he got too old to work it. That spring had been unusually wet. Rain fell in heavy sheets for days on end, turning the fields to mud and delaying planting. Thomas spent most days in the barn, fixing equipment that didn't really need fixing just to keep his hands busy. Lily worried about him when he couldn't farm, said he got too much in his head. Weather's always changed, he told her one evening as they sat on the porch watching yet another storm roll in. My dad used to say farming is just arguing with nature and hoping she listens once in a while. Lily smiled and squeezed his hand. Your dad was a smart man. This rain will pass. The storm that night was the worst they'd seen in years. Wind howled across the fields, bending the young corn stalks flat against the earth. Rain came sideways, hammering against the windows so hard Thomas worried they might crack. Around midnight, a boom shook the entire farmhouse, loud enough that both of them sat up in bed. Thunder? Lily asked, clutching the blanket. Too close for comfort, Thomas replied, though something about it hadn't sounded quite right for thunder. They discovered what had happened the next morning. The massive oak tree had been struck by lightning, splitting one side of the trunk from top to bottom. Half the tree still stood, but the other half had crashed to the ground, roots partially torn from the soil. Thomas stood looking at the damaged tree, feeling an odd sense of loss. Shame, he said when Lily came to stand beside him. That tree's been here longer than anything else on this land. Can it be saved? She asked. Thomas shook his head. Doubt it. Lightning got it good. I'll have to cut the rest down before it falls on someone. He decided to tackle the job that afternoon. No sense letting a perfectly good tree go to waste. The wood would keep them warm through next winter at least. Thomas loaded his chainsaw and tools into the back of his pickup and drove out to the edge of the property. The damage looked even worse up close. The split trunk revealed wood darkened by the lightning strike, and the massive root ball had heaved up a good portion of soil around it. Thomas was examining the best angle to make his first cut when something caught his eye, something unnatural among the exposed roots and dirt. Kneeling down, he brushed away some soil to reveal what looked like worked stone. Not just random rocks, but stones that had been shaped and fitted together. Thomas frowned. He'd lived on this land his entire life and had never known there was anything built here, especially not near the old oak. Curiosity got the better of him. Setting the chainsaw aside, Thomas began clearing more soil with his hands, then grabbed a shovel from his truck when that proved too slow. As he dug, more stonework appeared, what looked like the top of an archway buried for who knows how long beneath the tree. What in the world? He muttered to himself, stepping back to look at his discovery. The oak's roots had grown around and between the stones over decades, possibly centuries. The lightning strike and falling tree had torn away enough soil and roots to reveal what was unmistakably a human-made structure of some kind. Thomas considered calling Lily, but decided to investigate a bit more first. He cleared away enough dirt to see that the archway seemed to be the top of a passage that went down into the ground. It was about 4 feet tall, he'd have to stoop to enter, and maybe 3 feet wide. The stonework looked old, with a craftsmanship you didn't see much anymore. A cool breeze seemed to flow from the opening, carrying a musty smell of earth and age. Thomas hesitated. Common sense told him to leave it alone, to call someone, maybe the historical society in town, or at least tell Lily what he'd found. But there was something about discovering a secret on his own land he thought he knew every inch of, that made him want to look just a little further. He went back to his truck and grabbed a flashlight. Testing it with a click, he crouched down at the entrance to the passage. The beam of light cut through the darkness, revealing rough stone steps leading downward. Just a quick look, he promised himself. Then I'll go get Lily. The passage was a tight fit for his broad shoulders. The air inside was noticeably cooler than the spring warmth above, and the stone steps were slick with moisture. Thomas descended carefully, counting the steps as he went. After 15 steps, the passage leveled out and continued forward. The walls were lined with the same fitted stonework as the entrance, though here and there roots from the oak tree had pushed through, creating twisted wooden veins across the ceiling. Thomas estimated he'd walked about 30 feet when the passage suddenly widened into a small chamber. His flashlight beam couldn't illuminate the entire space at once, so he swept it slowly around, trying to make sense of what he was seeing. The chamber was roughly circular, perhaps 20 feet across, with a ceiling just high enough for Thomas to stand upright. Around the edges were what looked like stone benches or shelves carved directly from the rock. But what made Thomas's breath catch were the walls themselves. They were covered with markings. Some looked like writing in a script he didn't recognize, while others were symbols or crude drawings. Thomas moved closer, running his fingers over the etched surface. How old were these? Who had made them? He'd never heard stories about anything like this in the county. In the center of the room stood a stone table or altar of some kind, about waist-high. Unlike the rough-hewn walls, this had been carefully shaped and polished. Thomas approached it slowly, an unexpected feeling of unease settling over him. Something about the room felt watched. He swept his flashlight across the stone table's surface. It was bare except for a thin layer of dust and what looked like small indentations in the stone, grooves that ran to the edge of the table and then down its sides. Drainage channels, Thomas murmured, though he wasn't sure how he knew that. A sudden noise from the passage behind him made Thomas whirl around, heart pounding. The beam of his flashlight showed nothing but the empty corridor. Probably just settling earth, he told himself, but suddenly he felt like an intruder in this strange underground place. He decided he'd seen enough for now. This was something bigger than just an interesting find. People would want to know about a structure like this, hidden on his property for who knows how long. Thomas took a few photos with his phone, cursing the poor light, then made his way back to the passage. As he climbed the steps toward daylight, questions tumbled through his mind. Who had built this place, when, and why under a tree in what was now the corner of his farm? The land had been in his family for 3 generations, but the chamber looked much older than that. Emerging into the sunshine felt like waking from a dream. Thomas blinked. The normal sights of his farm, the distant red barn, the fields stretching to the horizon, his pickup parked nearby, suddenly seeming oddly unfamiliar. Lily was going to be amazed when he told her. Maybe their son Jack, who'd studied some archaeology in college before deciding on accounting instead, would have ideas about who to contact. The Historical Society would certainly be interested, maybe even the university over in Lancaster. Thomas turned for one last look at the partially exposed archway. Something about it troubled him, though he couldn't put his finger on why. The chamber had been sealed away, hidden for years until chance, a lightning strike on an ancient oak, had revealed it. Perhaps, a small voice in the back of his mind whispered, it had been hidden for a reason. Thomas shook off the thought. That was just his imagination running wild, fed by too many late-night history shows on TV. He gathered his tools, deciding to leave the tree removal for another day. The old oak had kept its secret for a long, long time. Now Thomas Walker was determined to uncover the truth about what lay beneath his land, no matter what that truth might be. Lily didn't believe him at first. Thomas could hardly blame her. It did sound far-fetched even as he told the story. An underground room? Under the old oak? She looked at him over her reading glasses, the newspaper forgotten in her lap. Tommy, are you pulling my leg? He shook his head and pulled out his phone. Got pictures, though they're not great. He handed the phone to her, watching as she swiped through the blurry images. Well, I'll be, she said finally. What do you think it is? Some kind of cellar from before the house was built? Too far from where any house would have stood, Thomas replied. And it doesn't look like any root cellar I've ever seen. Those symbols on the wall, they're not English letters. Lily handed the phone back, her expression now serious. You should call someone. The Historical Society, maybe. Thomas nodded. I will, but first I want to get a better look. These pictures don't show much. I thought I'd go back tomorrow with better lights, maybe take some measurements. I'm coming with you, Lily said firmly. No arguments. If there's something historic on our land, I want to see it too. Thomas smiled. After 30 years of marriage, he knew that tone. There would be no talking her out of it. They set out the next morning armed with better equipment: a heavy-duty lantern, a tape measure, a proper camera, and a thermos of coffee. Thomas had even brought along a small notebook to write down anything interesting they found. The entrance to the passage looked different in the morning light, more ominous somehow. Or maybe Thomas was just remembering the strange feeling he'd had down there. It's smaller than I imagined, Lily said, peering at the stone archway. You really went down there by yourself? Had to duck my head, but it's passable, Thomas replied. He switched on the lantern. Ladies first? Lily punched his arm playfully. Nice try. You lead the way, Farmer John. Thomas chuckled and crouched down to enter the passage again. The stone steps felt familiar now, though no less slippery. He counted them out loud for Lily's benefit as she followed close behind. 15 steps, he confirmed when they reached the bottom, then about 30 feet of tunnel. The lantern cast a much stronger glow than his flashlight had, illuminating the passage fully. Thomas noticed details he'd missed before: small niches cut into the walls at regular intervals, though they were empty now of whatever they might once have held. Look at the stonework, Lily whispered behind him, her voice filled with awe. This wasn't thrown together. Somebody took their time building this. Thomas nodded in agreement. The passage had been carefully constructed, each stone fitted tightly to its neighbors without mortar. The craftsmanship was remarkable. They reached the chamber and Thomas held the lantern high so Lily could take in the full space. Her sharp intake of breath told him she was just as impressed and unsettled as he had been. Tommy, she breathed. This is incredible. With the better light, they could now see the chamber in its entirety. The markings on the walls were more extensive than Thomas had realized, covering nearly every inch of the circular room. Some looked like writing, while others appeared to be maps or diagrams. Can you read any of this? Lily asked, moving closer to examine the wall. Thomas shook his head. Not a word. Doesn't look like any language I know. While Lily examined the wall carvings, Thomas approached the stone table in the center of the room again. In the improved light, he noticed something he'd missed during his first visit: a small rectangular depression in the center of the table's surface, about the size of a paperback book. Look at this, he called to Lily. There was something here, something that sat in this spot. Lily joined him, running her fingers along the edges of the depression. Like a box, maybe? Or a book? Could be. Thomas frowned, studying the table more carefully. These grooves, I thought they were drainage channels yesterday, but now I'm not sure. The thin lines carved into the stone surface radiated outward from the rectangular depression, branching and connecting in a pattern that reminded Thomas of a circuit board. Though that couldn't be right for something this old. It's like a map, Lily suggested, tracing one of the lines with her fingertip. Or maybe they represent rivers? Roads? Thomas didn't answer. He was distracted by something else he'd noticed: a faint discoloration in the stone around the grooves, a rusty reddish-brown tint that made his stomach tighten uncomfortably. They spent nearly an hour in the chamber taking photographs and measurements. Thomas sketched the layout in his notebook while Lily tried to copy some of the strange symbols. Neither of them spoke much. The chamber seemed to demand a certain reverence, like a church. Who do you think built this place? Lily finally asked as Thomas finished his rough sketch. No idea. The farm's only been in my family since my grandfather's time. Before that, I think the Hendersons owned this piece of land. The Hendersons? You mean like old Pete Henderson who runs the hardware store? Thomas nodded. His great-grandfather, I think. Might be worth asking if he knows any family stories about this place. As they prepared to leave, Thomas swept the lantern around one final time, making sure they hadn't missed anything. The light caught something on the floor near the wall opposite the entrance, something that glinted metallically. Wait, he said, moving toward it. There's something here. He crouched down and found a small object partially buried in the dirt floor. Carefully, he dug it out and held it up to the light. It was a coin, about the size of a quarter but thicker. The metal was dark with age and tarnish, but as Thomas rubbed it between his fingers, he could make out some kind of design stamped into its surface. Look at this, he said, handing it to Lily. What do you make of it? She examined it closely, turning it over in her palm. It's not American money, that's for sure. The markings look similar to those on the walls. She handed it back to him. You should show this to someone who knows about old coins. Thomas pocketed the coin, suddenly eager to be back in the sunshine. "Let's go," he said. "I've got Pete Henderson's number somewhere at home." The passage back to the surface seemed longer somehow, the air thicker and harder to breathe. Thomas was relieved when they finally emerged into the open air, the familiar sights and sounds of the farm greeting them. "Well," Lily said as they walked back to the house, "that was something else. Not what I expected to be doing on a Tuesday morning." Thomas laughed, though it sounded forced even to his own ears. The coin in his pocket felt unusually heavy. They called Pete Henderson that afternoon. The old man seemed surprised to hear from them. The Walkers and Hendersons were on friendly terms, but not close. But his surprise turned to genuine shock when Thomas explained what they'd found. A stone room. Under the old boundary oak? Pete's voice crackled over the speakerphone. There was a long pause before he spoke again. "You shouldn't have gone down there, Thomas." Something in Pete's tone made the hair on the back of Thomas's neck stand up. "You knew about it?" "Not exactly. There were stories. My grandfather mentioned something once about the old oak, said it marked more than just property lines. I always thought it was just talk." "What kind of stories?" Lily asked, leaning toward the phone. Another long pause. "Look, I'm closing the shop in an hour. Why don't I come by?" "Some things are better not discussed over the phone." Thomas and Lily exchanged glances. "Sure," Thomas said. "We'll put on some coffee." After they hung up, Lily turned to Thomas with concern in her eyes. "He sounded scared, Tommy." "Yeah." Thomas pulled the old coin from his pocket and looked at it again. In the bright kitchen light, he could make out more details. A symbol that might have been a tree on one side, and what looked like a face in profile on the other, though not like any portrait he'd seen on normal currency. Something Pete had said stuck in his mind. The old oak marked more than just property lines. Thomas had always thought of the massive tree as simply a landmark, a natural boundary marker. Now he wondered if it had been planted deliberately, meant to guard, or perhaps warn about what lay beneath. The sun was starting to sink toward the horizon, casting long shadows across the farm. Thomas found his eyes drawn to the distant oak, now broken and partially uprooted. From this distance, it still looked like any other tree, giving no hint of the secrets it had kept hidden for so long. In his pocket, the coin seemed to pulse with a subtle warmth against his leg. Thomas resisted the urge to take it out again, suddenly unsure he wanted Pete Henderson to know about it. Some discoveries, a voice in the back of his mind whispered, are best left buried. Pete Henderson arrived just as the sun was setting. He drove an old blue pickup that had seen better days, much like Pete himself. At 72, he moved slowly but deliberately, his weathered face creased with lines that told of decades spent under the Pennsylvania sun. Thomas met him at the door. "Thanks for coming, Pete. Appreciate it." The older man nodded, his expression somber. He carried a worn leather satchel under one arm, clutching it like it contained something precious. "Lily's got coffee in the kitchen," Thomas said, leading the way through the farmhouse. Pete settled at the kitchen table, placing the satchel carefully beside him. He accepted a mug of coffee from Lily with a nod of thanks, but didn't drink immediately. Instead, he stared into the dark liquid as if searching for words. "So," he finally said, looking up at them, "you found the old chamber." Thomas and Lily exchanged glances. "You knew about it?" Thomas asked, taking a seat across from Pete. "Not exactly." Pete sighed heavily. "My grandfather mentioned it a few times when I was young. Said there was something under the oak that should stay buried. Most folks thought he was just spinning tales the way old folks do." "But you believed him?" Lily asked, joining them at the table. Pete shrugged. "Didn't give it much thought, to be honest. Grandpa had lots of stories, but he was always dead serious about that oak tree. Made my father promise never to cut it down, and my father made me promise the same. When my grandfather bought this land from your family in 1923, was anything mentioned about the tree or what's beneath it?" Thomas asked. "Not officially, not in any papers. But family lore says there was a handshake agreement. Your grandfather promised to leave the oak standing, never dig around its roots." Pete finally took a sip of his coffee. "Guess lightning doesn't care about old promises." Thomas felt a chill despite the warm kitchen. "Pete, what exactly did your grandfather say was down there?" Pete set his mug down and opened his satchel. "Better I show you." He pulled out an old book, its leather binding cracked with age, the pages yellowed and brittle. "This was my grandfather's journal. He kept it hidden, and my father did too. When Dad passed, it came to me. He carefully opened the book and turned it so Thomas and Lily could see. The pages were filled with handwritten entries. The ink faded to a rusty brown. Thomas noticed that some pages had been torn out, leaving ragged edges in the binding. My grandfather, William Henderson, was born in 1872, Pete explained. He started writing this when he was about 20. The entries about the oak and what's beneath it start in 1896. Thomas leaned forward to read the faded handwriting. April 18th, 1896. Another meeting tonight. 7 attended. B still insists we need to broaden our work beyond the county. I disagree. What we do must remain local, contained. The old ways demand discretion. What is this? Thomas asked, looking up at Pete. Some kind of club minutes? Pete's face was grim. Keep reading. May 2nd, 1896. Use the chamber tonight. The oak grows stronger. R brought the stranger from Pittsburgh. He asked too many questions. We agreed he could not leave. The oak will feed well this spring. Thomas felt his stomach tighten. Pete, what am I reading here? The old man's voice was barely above a whisper. My grandfather was part of a group. They called themselves the Guardians of the Grove. Been around since the first settlers came to this valley. They used that chamber you found for their meetings, their rituals. Rituals? Lily repeated, her voice sharp with concern. What kind of rituals? Pete shook his head. Nothing good. That's all I'll say. My grandfather wrote about it because he started having doubts. He wanted to leave a record, I think, in case he ever found the courage to come forward. But he never did. Thomas turned more pages, skimming entries that became increasingly disturbing. The journal detailed meetings, strange ceremonies, and oblique references to feeding the oak and the old bargain. This is crazy, Thomas muttered. Are you saying there was some kind of cult operating on my land? Not just on your land, Pete replied quietly. All through this valley. Important people, town leaders, businessmen, landowners. My grandfather was the treasurer for 20 years. When he tried to leave in 1923, they threatened his family. That's why he sold the farm and moved into town to get away from the oak. But he couldn't really escape. None of them could. Thomas thought about the stone chamber with its strange markings, the table with its grooves. A horrible suspicion began forming in his mind. That stone table in the center of the room. He began. Pete cut him off with a raised hand. Don't. Some things are better not said out loud. He tapped the journal. It's all in here if you really want to know. But I wouldn't recommend it. Lily, who had been unusually quiet, suddenly spoke up. Pete, you're talking like this group might still be around. Surely not. This was all 100 years ago. Pete looked at her with sad eyes. The last entry in my grandfather's journal is from 1947, the year before he died. He wrote that they were still meeting, still performing the old rites, though less frequently. After that, I don't know. My father never spoke of it, but he kept this journal hidden and protected until the day he died. A heavy silence fell over the kitchen. Outside, the wind had picked up, whistling around the corners of the farmhouse. Thomas thought he could hear the creaking of the damaged oak in the distance. I found something down there, Thomas said finally, reaching into his pocket. He placed the coin on the table between them. Do you know what this is? Pete stared at the coin for a long moment, then slowly reached out to touch it. Their token, he whispered. Each member carried one. Where did you find it? On the floor of the chamber. It was partly buried in the dirt. Pete nodded. Someone dropped it then. They were supposed to be guarded carefully. He looked up at Thomas, his eyes suddenly intense. Has anyone else been down there since you found it? Have you told anyone else? Thomas shook his head. Just you. We thought about calling the Historical Society, but then we found the coin and decided to talk to you first. Good, Pete said firmly. Keep it that way. Seal up that entrance as soon as you can. Forget you ever found it. But, Thomas began. No buts, Pete interrupted. Listen to me. My grandfather was afraid of these people his whole life, afraid enough to sell his family farm and move away, afraid enough to keep this journal hidden where even his wife couldn't find it. Whatever they were doing down there, whatever they believed in, it wasn't right. And I can't guarantee they're all gone. Lily leaned forward. Pete, are you saying we might be in danger? The old man sighed heavily. I don't know. Maybe not. It's been a long time and people die, beliefs fade. But secrets have power in a small town. There are still families here whose roots go back to those early settlers. Families that have always seemed to have luck on their side, if you know what I mean. Thomas did know. There were certain families in the county that always seemed to prosper no matter what. Bad weather, economic downturns, personal tragedies, they weathered it all and came out stronger. I should go, Pete said, closing the journal and returning it to his satchel. I've said more than I planned to already. Thomas walked him to the door. The night had fully settled in now. The farm dark except for the yellow light spilling from the house windows. What would you do, Pete? Thomas asked quietly. If you were me? The old man considered for a moment. Fill in that passage. Plant a new tree. Then I'd take a good long look at that coin you found and decide whether knowing the full truth is worth the cost. And the cost would be? Pete met his eyes steadily. Peace of mind, Thomas. Once you know certain things, you can't unknow them. And this valley has secrets that could rob a man of sleep for the rest of his life. With that, Pete got into his truck and drove away, the taillights gradually disappearing down the long driveway. Thomas stood on the porch for a while, listening to the night sounds of the farm, the distant lowing of a cow, the rustle of wind in the cornfields, the creak of the broken oak, everything familiar yet suddenly strange. When he finally went back inside, Lily was sitting at the kitchen table, the coin in front of her. What do you think? She asked quietly. Thomas sat down beside her and picked up the coin, feeling its weight, tracing the strange tree symbol with his thumb. I think, he said slowly, that we need to know more before we decide what to do. Lily nodded, her face solemn in the kitchen light. Pete's journal mentioned names. Families in the county. We could look them up, see if there's any connection. And the symbols in the chamber, Thomas added. Someone might be able to identify them. There's that professor at the community college who teaches local history, Dr. Chen. Maybe he would know something. They sat in silence for a moment, both aware they were choosing a path that might lead places they didn't want to go. Are you sure, Tommy? Lily finally asked. Pete seemed pretty convinced we should just forget about it all. Thomas closed his fingers around the coin. I can't, Lil. This is our land. Whatever happened here, whatever that oak has been hiding all these years, I need to know. Outside, the wind picked up, howling now around the old farmhouse. Neither of them said it, but they both felt it. Something had changed. The discovery beneath the oak had connected them to something old and dark. A hidden current running beneath the peaceful surface of their lives. And now that they had dipped their toes into those waters, Thomas wasn't sure they could ever truly step back onto dry land again. Dr. Chen's office at the community college was cluttered with books, papers and artifacts that spoke of a lifetime spent studying the region's past. The walls were lined with shelves holding everything from arrowheads to old farm tools, each labeled with meticulous care. Thomas and Lily had to clear stacks of papers from the chairs before they could sit down. Sorry about the mess, Dr. Chen said, adjusting his glasses. End of semester chaos. He was a short, energetic man in his 60s with salt and pepper hair and a perpetually curious expression. Now, what's this mystery you mentioned on the phone? Something about an old structure on your property? Thomas had been careful when he called, saying only that they'd found something of possible historical interest. Now, sitting in the professor's office, he wondered how much to reveal. We found a stone chamber under an old oak tree on our land, he began, watching Dr. Chen's reaction closely. It looks very old, carved stone, strange symbols on the walls. The professor's eyes lit up with academic interest. Fascinating. Could be a root cellar, though the symbols you mention are intriguing. Any chance you took photographs? Lily pulled out her phone and handed it to him. We did. It's definitely not a root cellar. Dr. Chen swiped through the images, his expression growing more serious with each one. By the time he reached the last photo, his earlier enthusiasm had vanished. Where exactly on your property is this? He asked, his voice carefully neutral. Northern boundary, Thomas replied. Under an oak tree that got struck by lightning. Dr. Chen set the phone down and leaned back in his chair. The boundary oak. Of course. He was silent for a long moment, then abruptly stood and walked to his office door, closing it firmly. I'm going to ask you something, and I need you to be honest with me, he said when he returned to his desk. Have you shown these photos to anyone else? Talked to anyone about what you found? Just Pete Henderson, Lily answered. His family used to own our land. Dr. Chen nodded slowly. Pete would know something of this, yes. His grandfather was involved. Thomas felt a chill run through him. Involved in what exactly? The professor sighed and removed his glasses, pinching the bridge of his nose. I have studied the history of this valley for 30 years, Mr. Walker. Most of what I research is straightforward. Settlement patterns, agricultural development, immigration waves. But there are darker currents in our local history, things that don't make it into the county's official records. Like a secret society called the Guardians of the Grove? Thomas asked. Dr. Chen's head snapped up, his eyes sharp. Where did you hear that name? Pete showed us his grandfather's journal. It mentioned the group, but not many details. I see. Dr. Chen put his glasses back on and studied them both. What I'm about to tell you isn't published in any of my academic work. It's not something I discuss with my students or colleagues, but it is true, as far as I've been able to determine through years of private research. He stood and went to a filing cabinet in the corner, unlocking the bottom drawer with a key from his pocket. From it, he removed a thick folder bound with string. The valley was settled in the 1780s, he began, returning to his desk. The first families arrived to find dense forests and fertile soil. But there was something else here too, something the native peoples had long avoided. The early settlers' journals mention a tree unlike others and a place of wrong silence near what is now your northern boundary. Dr. Chen untied the folder and spread out several photocopies of handwritten documents. This is from Isaac Blackwood's diary, 1793. He writes about a harsh winter when food was scarce and several children fell ill. Then this entry, he pointed to a passage. March 15th, took counsel with H&W beneath the great oak. Old country ways may serve us here. The price is dear, but children need not starve when the land can be persuaded to yield. What does that mean? Lily asked, leaning forward to read the faded handwriting. The old country ways refers to pre-Christian practices some settlers brought with them, Dr. Chen explained. Beliefs about blood and soil, sacrifice and bounty. In times of desperation, some turned back to these older beliefs. Thomas thought about the stone table in the chamber, the grooves leading to its edges. Are you saying they performed sacrifices? Human sacrifices? Dr. Chen didn't answer directly. By summer of that year, the settlement was thriving. Crops flourished despite drought conditions elsewhere in the region. Blackwood's children recovered from their illness. And that autumn, they formalized what would become the Guardians of the Grove. He pulled out more documents, newspaper clippings, photographs, handwritten letters. For the next 150 years, certain families in this valley prospered regardless of conditions that ruined others. Their crops survived blights. Their businesses weathered depressions. Their sons returned safely from wars while neighboring farms lost entire generations. The families Pete's grandfather wrote about, Thomas murmured. The ones who always had luck on their side? Yes. Dr. Chen nodded grimly. 7 original families. The Blackwoods, the Harpers, the Winstons, the Cotters, the Parkers, the Duvals, and eventually, the Hendersons. Each maintained their position in the community through generations. Each contributed members to the Guardians. But what exactly did they do in that chamber? Lily pressed. Dr. Chen closed the folder, his expression troubled. I have theories, but little concrete evidence. What I do know is that every few years there would be a disappearance in the county, usually a drifter, occasionally a troublemaker, sometimes just someone who asked too many questions. The official record might show they moved on, or met with an accident, but the pattern is there if you know to look for it. Thomas remembered the journal entry about the stranger from Pittsburgh, who asked too many questions and could not leave. When did it stop? He asked, dreading the answer. That's the question, isn't it? Dr. Chen replied softly. Some of the original families died out or moved away. The Hendersons left in 1923. The Blackwoods lost their influence after the war. The last confirmed meeting I can document was in 1968, but you think it might have continued? Thomas finished for him. The professor nodded. There are 3 families from the original 7 still prominent in the county. The Parkers own the largest real estate company. The Winstons run the bank. And the Duvals have held the position of county judge for 4 generations. A heavy silence fell over the office. Outside, students passed in the hallway, their laughter a jarring contrast to the dark history being unfolded within. So what do we do with this information? Lily finally asked. Dr. Chen looked at them both gravely. That depends on what you want. If it were me, I'd seal up that chamber and forget I ever found it. That's what Pete said too, Thomas noted. Pete is a wise man, Dr. Chen replied. The Guardians operated in secret for generations because secrecy protected them. People who threatened that secrecy tended to face misfortune. Are you saying we're in danger? Lily asked, her voice tight. Dr. Chen carefully returned the documents to the folder. I'm saying that powerful people protect their interests. Whether the rituals continued or not, the families who benefited from them still hold influence in this county. They wouldn't appreciate their ancestors' activities becoming public knowledge. Thomas thought about the coin in his pocket, the one he'd brought to show Dr. Chen, but now hesitated to reveal. What about artifacts from the chamber? Would they be worth anything to a museum or university? Dr. Chen's eyebrows rose. You found something besides the chamber itself? Reluctantly, Thomas pulled out the coin and placed it on the desk. The professor picked it up with obvious excitement, examining both sides carefully. Extraordinary, he murmured. This matches descriptions I've read but never seen. Their token of membership. That's what Pete called it too, Thomas said. Dr. Chen handed the coin back, surprising Thomas. This is evidence of a history that powerful people would prefer to remain buried. Mr. Walker. No reputable museum would touch it without verifiable provenance, which you can't provide without revealing the chamber. And once you do that, the families would know, Lily finished. Precisely. Dr. Chen retied the folder and returned it to the locked drawer. The question you need to ask yourselves is whether bringing this history to light serves any purpose beyond satisfying curiosity. The Guardians, if they still exist in any form, haven't been active in decades as far as I can tell. The past is past. But what they did was wrong, Thomas insisted. Criminal even. Undoubtedly, the professor agreed. But the people who committed those acts are long dead. What remains are their descendants, most of whom likely know nothing about their ancestors' activities. Thomas wasn't convinced. If the Parkers, Winstons, and Duvals benefited from these sacrifices, shouldn't there be some accountability? Dr. Chen smiled sadly. Accountability for the sins of great-grandparents? Where would such accounting end, Mr. Walker? Few family histories can bear close scrutiny if we go back far enough. They left the college with more questions than answers. The drive back to the farm was quiet, both lost in their thoughts. The sky had darkened with approaching storm clouds, casting the landscape in gloomy shadow. He didn't exactly tell us to drop it, Lily finally said, as they turned onto the gravel road leading to their farm. But he came pretty close. Pete, Dr. Chen, they're both scared, Thomas replied, gripping the steering wheel tightly. That tells me there's something here worth uncovering. Lily looked at him, concern etched on her face. Tommy, these are powerful families we're talking about. Judge Duvall sentenced Andy Miller's boy to 10 years just last month. The Winstons hold the mortgage on half the farms in the county, including ours. And if we ever wanted to sell this place, we'd need the Parkers. So we just pretend we never found the chamber, never saw the journal or talked to Dr. Chen, go back to planting corn and hoping for good weather. The bitterness in Thomas's voice surprised even him. I'm just saying we need to be careful, Lily said softly. Whatever happened in that chamber, it happened a long time ago. Thomas didn't respond as they pulled up to the farmhouse. Rain had started to fall, fat drops splattering the windshield. They made a dash for the porch, the countryside around them gradually disappearing behind a curtain of water. Inside, Thomas went to the window, watching the rain sweep across the fields. From here, he could just make out the broken oak near the property line, its shattered form a dark smudge against the gray horizon. I need to think, he said, not turning around. There's something here we're still missing. Lily came up behind him, wrapping her arms around his waist and resting her head against his back. We'll figure it out, Tommy. We always do. But as the storm intensified outside, Thomas wasn't so sure. The coin in his pocket seemed to grow heavier by the hour, a tangible link to secrets long buried beneath his land, secrets that had shaped this valley and perhaps still did. And somewhere out there, he couldn't help but wonder if others were already aware that the boundary oak had given up its charge, others who might not want the full truth to emerge into the light of day. The storm lasted through the night, rain drumming on the roof as Thomas lay awake beside Lily. Sleep wouldn't come. His mind kept returning to the chamber beneath the oak, to Pete's grandfather's journal, to the names Dr. Chen had mentioned. Parker, Winston, Duvall, families whose influence shaped the county to this day. By morning, the rain had stopped, leaving behind a world washed clean and glistening in the early sunlight. Thomas stood on the porch with a cup of coffee, watching the mist rise from his fields. Everything looked so normal, so peaceful. It was hard to believe that just a few hundred yards away lay evidence of something so disturbing. Couldn't sleep? Lily asked, joining him with her own coffee. Thomas shook his head. Kept thinking about what we should do next. And? He turned to look at her. I think we need to talk to someone from one of those families. Someone who might know if the guardians are still active. Lily frowned. If Dr. Chen is right, that could be dangerous. Maybe, but we can't just sit on this. Lil, not knowing what happened on our land. What might still be happening? She sighed, knowing that stubborn tone in his voice. Who did you have in mind? Richard Parker. His company handled the sale when we bought the back 40 from the Millers 5 years ago. He seemed decent enough. The Parkers were one of the original 7 families, Lily reminded him. Exactly. If anyone would know something, it would be Richard. Lily stared out at the farm, her expression troubled. Tommy, are you sure this is about finding the truth and not about… She hesitated. About what? About the farm. About how hard the last few years have been for us. She turned to face him fully. Dr. Chen said these families always prospered while others struggled. We've had 3 tough seasons in a row. The bank, Winston's bank, has been patient so far, but you think I'm jealous? That I want whatever advantage they had? Thomas felt a flash of anger, then, just as quickly, uncertainty. Was there some truth to what she was suggesting? I think you're frustrated, Lily said gently. And finding that chamber learning about the guardians, it offers a reason why some people have it easier than we do. Thomas stared into his coffee. It's more than that. People died in that chamber, Lil. If the families who benefited are still around, still profiting from what their ancestors did, then what? You'll expose them? Bring them to justice somehow? For things that happened generations ago? Thomas had no ready answer. What exactly did he hope to accomplish? Revealing the truth might bring some closure to families whose ancestors had disappeared, but it could also destroy the lives of people who had nothing to do with those crimes. I just need to know, he said finally, one way or another. Lily nodded, recognizing his determination. Then we'll talk to Richard Parker. Together. The Parker real estate office occupied a renovated Victorian house on Main Street. It was the largest real estate company in the county, handling everything from farmland to commercial properties in the growing suburbs. Richard Parker's office was on the 2nd floor, with large windows overlooking the town square. Thomas, Lily, good to see you, Richard greeted them, rising from behind his desk. He was a tall man in his 50s with a runner's build and a carefully cultivated, friendly demeanor. What brings you in today? Not thinking of selling the farm, I hope? No, nothing like that, Thomas assured him as they sat in the leather chairs facing Richard's desk. We wanted to ask you about something else. Something historical. Richard raised an eyebrow. Historical? Well, I'm no historian, but my family's been here a long time. What would you like to know? Thomas hesitated, then decided on directness. Have you ever heard of a group called the Guardians of the Grove? The change in Richard was subtle but unmistakable. His smile remained in place, but something in his eyes shifted, a sudden wariness. Can't say that I have. Sounds like some environmental organization. Why do you ask? We found something on our property, Lily said. An underground stone chamber beneath the old boundary oak. Richard's hands, which had been resting comfortably on the desk, slowly withdrew to his lap. Is that so? Old root cellar, perhaps? It's not a root cellar, Thomas said, watching Richard closely. It has stone benches around the walls, strange symbols carved everywhere, and a table in the center with grooves that looked like they were designed to drain something. The silence that followed was heavy with unspoken knowledge. Richard maintained his pleasant expression, but Thomas could see a muscle working in his jaw. The lightning strike, Richard said finally. That old oak on your northern boundary. I heard it was hit pretty bad. Thomas nodded. It uprooted part of the tree, exposed the entrance to the chamber. Richard leaned back in his chair, his forced casualness betrayed by the tension in his shoulders. Well, this area has a long history. All sorts of structures get built and forgotten over time. This wasn't forgotten, Thomas countered, pulling out the coin and placing it on the desk between them. This was hidden. Richard stared at the coin, making no move to touch it. Where did you get that? Found it in the chamber, Thomas replied. Pete Henderson recognized it as a token of the Guardians. So did Dr. Chen at the community college. At the mention of these names, something like resignation crossed Richard's face. "You've been busy." "We just want to understand what we found," Lily said, her voice gentle but firm. Richard was silent for a long moment, his eyes never leaving the coin. Then he reached for his desk phone. "Donna, hold my calls for the next hour, please." "Yes, including the Westridge developer. Thank you." He set the phone down and looked at them both. "What exactly do you want to know?" "Everything," Thomas said simply. "What happened in that chamber? Whether the Guardians are still around? What it all has to do with your family? The Winstons and the Duvalls?" Richard closed his eyes briefly as if gathering himself. When he spoke again, his voice had lost its professional polish. "My great-grandfather was William Parker. He joined the Guardians in 1912 and became their leader in 1925. My grandfather and father were both members." He opened his eyes and looked directly at Thomas. "I was initiated on my 21st birthday. That was the tradition." Thomas felt Lily stiffen beside him. "So the group does still exist?" "Not in the way you're thinking," Richard replied. "Not for a long time. The last ceremony of the old kind was in 1968. After that, it became more of a social club, a way for certain families to maintain connections, share information. The old beliefs faded. But not entirely," Thomas pressed. Richard sighed. Some of the older members still believed in the power of the oak, the connection between the land and those who tended it. "My father used to say that as long as the boundary oak stood, the original covenant remained in force." "Covenant," Lily repeated. "With what?" Richard shook his head. "That gets into beliefs I never fully embraced. Something from the old world that the first settlers encountered here. Something that could bless or curse the land depending on how it was approached." "And the people who disappeared?" Thomas asked, his voice hard. "The strangers who asked too many questions?" A shadow crossed Richard's face. "I never participated in anything like that. By my father's time, those practices had stopped. But yes, I grew up hearing stories about the early days, about the necessary sacrifices to ensure prosperity." His mouth twisted with distaste. It was barbaric, unforgivable. But it was also a different time with different beliefs. "Did you know about the chamber under our oak?" Lily asked. Richard nodded slowly. "I knew it existed, though I've never been inside. The ritual site was moved to a lodge on Winston property sometime in the 1940s. More comfortable, I guess. Less primitive." "And the Guardians now?" Thomas pressed. "You, the Winstons, the Duvalls, do you still meet?" "Not for many years," Richard said quietly. "Judge Duval still talks about reviving the tradition sometimes, especially when things go badly for the county. The drought 3 years ago, the factory closure last year. He sees these as signs that the covenant is weakening, but most of us just nod and change the subject." Thomas absorbed this, trying to reconcile the respectable businessman before him with the dark history he described. "Do you think there's any truth to it? The covenant, the power of the oak?" Richard was silent for a long moment. "My family has prospered for generations when others failed. Is that luck? Good business sense? Or something else?" He shrugged. "I chose to believe it was just privilege and connections, not blood magic. It's easier to sleep at night that way." "And now that the oak is damaged?" Lily asked. Something like genuine concern flickered across Richard's face. "That's the question, isn't it? Some would see it as an omen. Others as just a tree struck by lightning." He looked at Thomas. "What do you intend to do with all this?" It was the question Thomas had been wrestling with for days. Sitting here now, facing a man who admitted his family's connection to historical atrocities, the answer still wasn't clear. "I don't know," he admitted. "Part of me wants to expose everything, the chamber, the Guardians, what happened there. But to what end? The people who committed the worst acts are long dead." Richard nodded slowly. "And revealing it all would destroy families who had nothing to do with those crimes. My children, the Winston children, others. They don't deserve to be branded by the sins of their ancestors." "So we just forget it ever happened?" Thomas asked, anger edging his voice. "No," Richard replied, surprising him. "We remember it privately. We ensure it never happens again. And perhaps," he hesitated, "perhaps we find ways to make amends even if the debt isn't publicly known." "What kind of amends?" Lily asked. Richard looked at them both. "Your farm has struggled these past few years. The bank, Winston's bank, could restructure your loan. My company could help with the property taxes, not as some supernatural exchange, but as an acknowledgement of the past. Thomas bristled. We're not looking for charity. Not charity, Richard corrected. Restitution. Quiet, respectful restitution for what was taken and what was given. He nodded toward the coin still lying on his desk. The covenant works both ways, Mr. Walker. The land demands balance. Thomas stared at the coin, the tree symbol seemingly more prominent now in the afternoon light from the windows. He had come seeking truth, perhaps even justice. Instead, he was being offered a compromise. Silence in exchange for security. The same bargain the Guardians had made generations ago. I need time to think, he said finally, reaching for the coin. Richard nodded. Of course, but I should warn you. There are others who might not be as understanding about your discovery. Judge Duval, for one, still holds to the old ways more strongly than most. Is that a threat? Thomas asked, his voice hardening. A friendly warning, Richard replied. The past casts long shadows, Mr. Walker. Sometimes it's better to walk around them than to try to chase them away. They left the real estate office with more answers than they had arrived with. Though not the ones Thomas had expected, the walk back to their truck was silent, both lost in their thoughts. What are you thinking? Lily finally asked as they drove back toward the farm. Thomas stared at the road ahead, the coin heavy in his pocket. I'm thinking about balance. About debts and payments. About how easy it would be to take what Richard offered. And how hard it would be to live with that decision, Lily added softly. He nodded. The oak kept its secret for generations. Now it's passed that burden to us. As they crested the hill overlooking their farm, Thomas slowed the truck. From this vantage point, he could see everything. The house, the barn, the field stretching to the horizon, and near the northern boundary, the broken oak. Their land. Their home. Their responsibility now. We'll plant a new tree, he said suddenly, next to the old oak. Something strong and enduring. And we'll fill in that chamber, seal it up for good. And the coin? Lily asked. Richard's offer? Thomas was quiet for a moment. We'll tell Pete what we learned. And Dr. Chen, too. He spent years piecing together this history. They deserve to know the truth. And the rest of it we keep to ourselves? Lily sounded uncertain. For now, Thomas replied. Some secrets belong to the land itself. Maybe someday the full story should be told, but not today. Not by us. He drove down toward the farmhouse, a decision settling in his heart. The hidden passage beneath the oak had shown him darkness from the past, but also a path forward, one that acknowledged history without being bound by it. As they passed the broken oak, Thomas slowed again, looking at the ancient tree that had kept watch for so long. Its secret was out now, shared among a few who understood its significance, and perhaps that was enough. Not justice as he had imagined it, but truth preserved, remembered and balanced by quiet acts of restitution across generations. The covenant would continue, but on different terms now. Terms that Thomas Walker, simple farmer and unexpected keeper of secrets, would help to define. The boundary oak might be broken, but its roots still ran deep through the soil of his land. And now he realized through him as well.